Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, July 21st, or 23rd, 2024 at 5:16 PM. And with a quorum of members present, I will call the Finance Committee meeting to order. So thanks for coming in this evening. We don't have a common council meeting, so that gives us plenty of time to get through the agenda items. We won't have to rush, but we don't have to stay all night either. Item number one on our agenda is minutes of the previous meeting. That's from July 9th, 2024. I'll entertain a motion. A motion from Killian and second from Gisselman. Any discussion? Not hearing anything. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Item number two, discussion and possible action on additional fire chief vehicle. We did discuss this at our previous meeting, and we asked for a little bit more information. And I see both Chief Kopp and Solomon are here. So you can fill us in on, we got a memo here in the packet, but you can fill us in on any other details.
It's excellent. Well, first, I just want to start out by apologizing for the last meeting and not having all the information that I should have from Solomon. I also want to clarify on there, it says chief's vehicle. This would be a division chief, or division chief of training vehicle, not an actual chief's vehicle. I was questioned that by one of the media outlets today in an email asking why I needed a second vehicle. So, so I just wanted to state those two things. And we were just talking in the back just before the meeting started with Eric, Dustin, Solomon, and myself, and we might have found another alternative that I want to bring out right away too. And that's a vehicle that the city already leases that is for the city hall.
So we have a vehicle that's shared amongst multiple different departments, and that is a vehicle that was brought on multiple mayors ago, and that vehicle is shared amongst finance, attorney's office, DPW, engineering, so on and so forth, the mayor's office. The mayor did ask a couple weeks ago from me what the future of that vehicle looks like, so we already started looking at it already, kind of. He doesn't really have too much of a use for it, or at least that's what he was mentioning. So we were running the percentage on who really uses that vehicle so that we can do the billing appropriately, and that vehicle is being used less and less and less. So it sounds like instead of acquiring a new vehicle, we could potentially repurpose that vehicle.
So this is like a pool vehicle then that would be just permanently assigned to the fire department?
Correct. And so there would still be a need for that vehicle with the other departments, I would imagine, but we would have to be more resourceful, reach out to Jeremy and stuff to see if we could still borrow that vehicle as needed type of a thing. But we could definitely, it's not being used as much as it used to.
Okay. Okay. And that would be suitable for the department? It would meet the department's needs?
Yeah.
It's currently a GMC Terrain, so it's a smaller SUV.
Okay. 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 What, any idea what the financial I suppose that it would be budget neutral because it's already being funded through the other departments. So, okay.
That's correct. It's part of the lease budget.
Okay. I guess, Alder Killian.
Will it, if it's available on an as-needed basis, will that satisfy your needs? I mean,
Yeah, I was just telling Eric that, I mean, whenever anyone in the city needs a vehicle, I'd be more than happy to, lend a hand and help out. Missing a vehicle for short periods of time isn't a challenge that we can't overcome. It's the everyday in and out that it's really putting us behind having someone without the opportunity to move training equipment around and get to different training sites. So I don't have a problem with that at all.
well, as long as it satisfies your needs and is less expensive for the city, it sounds like a good deal.
Okay. Any other questions? Alder Tierney?
I just wanted to say thank you to both of you for looking at some alternatives that would be the best financial situation for the city, but would yet meet your needs as well. I really appreciate the diligence of going outside the box. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one thing I'd like to add, though, real quick, just because it came on so fast, that technically this vehicle is assigned to the mayor, and then it is shared as other people need it. So I would definitely want to have some correspondence with Mayor Denny and make sure that He's also in agreements with this, but technically that vehicle is assigned to the mayor's office, so we would be removing that from him and assigning to the fire department, and then he would have to ask to use a certain vehicle, so on and so forth.
Okay, that could be worked out internally, though, I would imagine. So, Alder McElhaney.
This probably is out of order, but why is a vehicle allocated to the mayor when he already has a $350 a month allowance for a vehicle?
This was a vehicle that we've had many, many mayors ago, and the mayor has always had the vehicle assigned to them. And then, like I was saying, it's shared amongst all the other individuals in City Hall. But his assistant would use that quite often to set up things amongst the departments and so on and so forth, and then shared amongst the legal department and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I think there's like a rental through Outlook where people
Yep.
reserve the vehicle. So if the city attorney's office is going to a conference or someone else is going to a conference, they can reserve it to use it. But I think to Solomon's point, after COVID, a lot of meetings and organizations went to WebEx meetings. People don't travel for conferences like they used to. And so we're seeing a lot of decline in actual, going to conferences. So I think that's, reduced the usage. And quite frankly, there's still people who use their own vehicle and don't use that vehicle. And we really encouraged people to try to use that vehicle to reduce the cost, because we're then paying mileage to the employees if they're traveling with their own car. And it was thought that this would save the city money in the long run. But, not everyone uses it, and there's really no compliance effort underway to ensure that people are using it, so.
Okay, Alder Gisselman.
When does the lease run out?
I can tell you. So, let's see here. That lease was, it started in March of '23, and it is a 60-month term, so it's 5 years. So March of 2028, we would be looking at replacement. Or the option is also to keep the vehicle if we would like.
Right. My question is, if I wasn't getting, that's a larger issue with regard to the fleet and to the lease and to the use of vehicles, especially the lease. That's a larger issue, so I'm glad we have an alternative.
Yeah. The previous vehicle was used a lot. I mean, it was retired with 140, 130,000 miles on it, so the vehicle definitely used to get used a lot, and that's why it was replaced. But
Okay.
we've just been seeing this.
But it seems like it's not being used as much in this day and age.
Correct.
What is the monthly rental amount, lease amount on that vehicle?
That vehicle is currently at, with the maintenance program, is at $562.23.
So.
And that's already budgeted for.
Okay, and we have a 5-year lease on it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? I'm not sure if we require a motion or if we can just go forward with direction to just do what you need to do to verify, to verify that that vehicle can be transferred since it's budget neutral. There's no action
Right.
for the finance committee, so. I
Okay.
guess do what you need to do, and if it doesn't work out, I guess come back to the committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was easy. Number 3, a discussion and possible action regarding budget modification for street maintenance. And we saw a memo in our packet here, and Eric's coming up, so.
Yeah, good evening. The mayor had asked Mary Ann and I to take a look at our budget with the, kind of the soft winter that we've had. And of course, the winter spans different years. And so we're not exactly sure, obviously, what the fourth quarter this year will be. But after talking with Mary Ann, we felt that the first part of the winter this year was mild, and we were both comfortable with about a savings of about $200,000 that we could potentially put towards hot mix for doing additional road maintenance this year. That work would be done in-house. Some of that we would have to contract out for milling, but the majority of it would be used with in-house with the new equipment that this committee allowed us to purchase, which has been very beneficial for our crews. So, yeah.
I would just add that we already did reallocate some of this projected
True.
savings
Thank
to this ice crusher or whatever, what's it called?
Yeah, the icebreaker.
Icebreaker.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's supposed to break up compacted ice on the road, and that was under 100,000, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, I think that piece of equipment was. So this would be the second allocation of expected savings.
Right, yeah.
But that still keeps enough in reserve, so if we have a more traditional fourth quarter, November and December would be okay?
We
think
we think so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we're trying to predict,
Yeah.
you know, but we felt comfortable at this number at this point.
Okay. Okay. All right, a motion from Gisselman. Do I have a second? Second from Tierney. Any discussion? Not hearing anything. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that carries. All right. Thanks,
Thank
Eric.
you, thank you.
Yep, I know. We'll see more better roads out there. Item number 4, a discussion and possible action regarding the procurement policy. And our procurement policy, we usually look at this every couple of years.
Right.
And I did see a couple of changes in the policy. So Mary Ann, if you want to kind of walk us through.
Yeah, so we, this policy, I actually don't recall how long ago it went into effect, but it was quite a few years ago, I want to say before 2010. And as Alderman Martins indicated, we've been making changes to it. The last big change we made was to increase that threshold. It used to be a $5,000 threshold to $10,000. If they had to go out for RFP for quotes on purchases, we moved to the $10,000 so that it coincided with the federal regulations, so that when we were looking at spending for ARPA, for example, we didn't have two different rules, one that was city rule and one that was federal rule. But these really are just clarifying and maybe correcting some of the language. It was the city attorney's office, finance, and the city clerk and the mayor met on this. So the first one really was about contract authorization, and that the contracts are often awarded by the Board of Public Works. So particularly on their big construction projects, we, SISM, and Eric, I don't know if you want to come up here and talk about this at all, but SISM, which is now, has a name change that I. Infrastructure, comes up with a list of projects that they want us to accomplish. Those projects are budgeted for and included in that budget year. The council does a resolution to adopt assessments or let assessments against those projects. And then the Board of Public Works is responsible for going out for bid, opening the bids, and awarding the bid to the lowest bidder, because these are all considered public construction, so it has to go to the low bid because the state statutes kick in on those types of projects. There's a giant bug right there that I'm keeping an eye on. So really, we just wanted to change it so it's more, the language is more reflective of our process.
Yes, I would agree. Typically what happens, as Mary Ann said, when we bid out these large projects, they're in the budget. There have been periodic times when we've had to come back to committee, though, if projects came in over budget.
Right.
If we had high bids or something like that. But typically our process is, as long as they're within the approved budget of the city council, then the Board of Public Works then manages those projects moving forward. And it's been a pretty good process.
Right. And that's when you see, for example, with larger proposals that they're opened at the Board of Public Works, while the Board of Public Works, and this is one of the, I guess, conversations we had at our meeting, our ordinance, and please correct me if I'm wrong, our ordinance establishes what the Board of Public Works roles and responsibilities are. And some of the proposals that we're opening at the Board of Public Works may not fall strictly within those roles identified. But it's a very public forum. Obviously, they're taped, minutes are taken, and so it really adds a level of transparency to our procurement process. So that's, I think, why we elected to have the Board of Public Works open some of these RFPs that really aren't considered public construction.
Right. Yeah.
So the next item is really on contracts that require approval. So not every contract goes to council for approval, and the next area outlines those contracts that require council approval. And the intergovernmental contracts, you can see that were in excess of 5,000 previously required council approval. We propose to increase that to 10,000, again, so that it coincides with the purchasing rule of 10,000.
With the federal rules.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the final one was really who is signing the contracts, and really it added city finance director and city attorney. Those are, we are on the signature plate, I guess, for our construction projects, but all other contracts, we don't have to sign the contract. So it really is just a correction or putting it in accordance with what the practice is.
So does that mean you're removing city finance director and city attorney, or?
Well, we would still sign those, for the construction
Yes.
contracts.
Okay.
But this gives you the impression we sign all, and we
Oh,
don't
okay,
sign all.
okay. So that's, okay, so that is strike through then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So those are the changes.
All right, any questions? Alder Killian?
Have the finance director and the city attorney been signing these contracts? If that's the policy.
Right.
Have you not?
And
been
I think that's why the city attorney brought it up. She's like, we should correct this, because we don't, like some contracts, we don't even see. So,
Is it important that you and the city attorney see the
Well,
contracts?
I think, with the public construction contracts, and I don't know where the contract lead, we obviously use a template for the public construction contracts, and I don't know if there's a law that dictates that, but it basically gives me the opportunity to sign that, yes, these funds were budgeted for, and why does the city attorney sign that? I don't recall what that language is. There's like a little blip under mine that says these funds have been budgeted for, and then I sign it. So,
Just from a contractual standpoint, it would, any contract, it would seem important that we know there's enough funds and that it has been
Sure.
reviewed legally. So I guess I don't understand why that's not important.
we could keep it in there and then, change our contract forms and, go through the educational process of getting the departments so that they send those contracts to us. There are contracts, like grant contracts, let's say, with federal transportation that don't even have a spot. For others, like just the mayor and the clerk, that's all they have on there. But, can you put other signatures? Maybe. I don't know.
But now, would these be contracts that have already received council approval?
Yes.
So,
Well,
So there
unless
w-
they're unless they fall within the guidelines.
unless they fall within the guidelines?
Yes.
So,
I think when we look at, excuse me, Mike, but I think when we look at, like, when we bid a project, right, and the Board of Public Works approves that bid, right? That contract, that's not approval of the contract, right? That contract gets approved through the legal office for that construction. So they review it, Mary Ann signs it, the clerk signs it, the mayor signs it, that, all of those things. We do, and all departments they all do contracting, right? And we do professional services contracts and all of those things. And that's one reason too why all of those things go to the Board of Public Works, because they need to be publicly opened. Proposals, sometimes it takes multiple Board of Public Works to see those, because we have to open them. Then staff will have to, review them and rank them, and then possibly bring them back for a decision. So there's a lot that goes into that. But those professional services contracts we have a template that the attorney's office put together, and typically my department uses that template for professional services, has all our insurance and stuff requirements. So they don't necessarily review that after, because it's their template. If any changes are made, they do. But as Mary Ann said, that, a lot of departments, a lot of grants, a lot of other things have not necessarily a template contract, but, that get moved.
I guess it just made common sense that, if something came up in the future, to know that the attorney had reviewed it on a contract for the
Right.
city. That was just my thought.
I think it's the level of resources that would be available as well to review every single contract that comes through the city would be extensive. So
Difficult.
it's well taken. I agree with you. But it's a level of resources that are available.
Tierney?
Sure. Would it be in the best interest to have a dollar amount for the city attorney to look at? Obviously, if something is 2 million, it's a lot more important than if it's $20,000. So I guess my concern is when we start hitting those really high dollar services and agreements, that it would be in our best interest to have the city attorney look at those.
I mean, that's certainly an option for you to consider as well.
I
Oh, I said Ann is here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got any, I see Ann is in the room, if there are any particular questions you want to direct to her. I do notice that, purchase of contracts of goods and services valued at 10,000 or less may be signed by individual department directors. So I suppose, I guess the question would be is if it's over 10,000 and under, what amount would you want to see, a higher level of certification? Or if it's needed at all, if signatures by the mayor and the clerk are enough to enter into an agreement. So. Yeah,
I don't think it's so much a question of entering into the agreement that's not adequate. I think it's about legal protection. If something would arise in the future on any contract, I think it's important for the city to know that it has been approved and reviewed by our council.
Okay. All right, any other discussion?
I guess my question is, right now, what does the city attorney and the city finance officer sign? What types of contracts are you looking at and signing?
Those contracts that the template, that are public construction contracts, that I don't know where this, the template hasn't changed in the 30 years that I've been here. So it's the same template, and I don't know where it came from, but that's what I sign. And just like the procurement policy says, I'm certifying that funds have been provided by council to pay the liability that's incurred under the contract, so that it's budgeted for, and the city attorney is signing as to form. And the city clerk is attesting to the mayor's signature. So that's what it must say on that template. And then if someone asks for the finance director to be included, for example, when contract is a very broad term, as I've pointed out, it can be for grant award, it can be to borrow money. So, again, our bond council has, thick documents that we sign after each bond sale that's been approved by council. I have signatures that are placed on some of those documents, not all of the documents. The mayor is on, some of the documents, not all. The city clerk is. All of that is dictated by bond council. That would be another example. I'm trying to think if there's other contracts that I am regularly asked to sign, and I can't think of any other ones offhand.
Has anybody looked at that template in the last 30 years to see
Well,
if it
I'm
needed
sure someone
updating?
has.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I read 3 pages of it, so
Yeah, I was just going to say, if
that
nothing's been
portion of it
changed in
hasn't
30
changed.
years,
I should have clarified that.
a lot of things
Though-
changed, so that was a
Right.
little,
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure the insurance levels have changed. That was a very simplistic response, I'm sorry.
Okay. Anything else? I mean, if you're concerned about the language in that last item,
Yeah.
we could probably, in the committee here, we could strike it.
Right.
So, if you think that's if that's an issue to the policy.
I think I would be more comfortable
Okay.
with that language being left in so that we know everyone has reviewed it appropriately.
Okay. So we would need to move forward, then we would need a motion and then an amendment, so, to leave, and then an amendment to leave that language in city finance director and city attorney in that last statement, so, okay.
I make a motion that we leave the finance director and the city attorney in to review and sign the contracts.
So a motion to accept the procurement policy with
And
the,
amendment.
with the change of leaving in city finance director and city attorney as
Yeah.
signatories.
Thank you, Michael, yes.
I believe that's correct. It's, so, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Tierney? All right. Alder Mathlany.
I'm not going to support this amendment because it's clear in here that it's the city finance director, even with the, that they're certifying the funds, and the city attorney shall approve the contract as to the form. So that is already in there. I think this language that was struck is redundant.
It very well could be. It does, yeah, the second sentence does say the city finance director shall certify that the funds have been provided and the council pay, yes, so that, and the language is in there, but they're not
sign it.
signing it, and I think that's what, I believe Alder Killian, that's what you were looking for, just that added level.
Correct. I think it's an added level of protection
Okay.
for the city.
Okay, anything else? Alder, Gary, I think I saw you, go ahead.
Well, so a basic contract, all the basic contracts are approved by the city attorney, because they may all be of of familiar wording, so that it's pretty much a standard template contract. And are you,
Go ahead and finish.
pardon?
Go ahead and finish.
Because you are also the repository, I would trust, of those contracts.
I would say no to both of those
would say
questions,
no.
which is, I started this whole conversation because it's made me nervous for many years that it says the city attorney shall approve every contract as to form, and I don't know if I see 10% of the contracts that come into the city. I don't know who's signing them. I've advised people that it should be the mayor and the clerk that sign them unless the council in its resolution gives authority to another individual to bind the city to those terms. So I wanted that language removed because I don't see all the contracts. I do agree with Becky that the first sentence, it's just more clarifying. It's not necessarily redundant. It doesn't hurt anything, but it's duplicative. You're right. It says contracts will be signed by the mayor, countersigned by the clerk, finance director, and city attorney, which is true, as Mary Ann said, for the Board of Public Works street construction contracts. And then it goes on to clarify what the finance director is signing to, certifying the funds, and I'm signing that it's correct as to form, only to the Board of Public Works street construction project contracts. So I don't know if this paragraph was really to be limited to the street construction contracts that we review at the Board of Review or not, because then it goes on to talk about contract change orders can be signed by the Board of Public Works, which are the three of us, Eric, Mary Ann, and me. But no, I have never reviewed all the contracts that are signed binding the city. No, that has not happened. And what was your second question?
The repository.
Oh, that's the city clerk. Yep, so we will, the ones that we work on, that we negotiate and get signed or bring through council, we will follow through, make sure they get executed, copies out to the appropriate parties, and then we file the original with the city clerk as the custodian of original records of the city. So we'll have copies of the ones we worked on, but we won't have copies of, I'm imagining the city clerk has more copies of contracts than we have if people are depositing them in that office.
Alderman McElhenney?
I mean, I don't know how many contracts the city goes, but I could see a real slowdown if everything had to go through the city attorney's office. I think we have to be careful of what we ask.
Yep.
Because if, we haven't run into difficulties, and I know somebody said something, if it's 2 million, if it's 2 million, it's going through Ann's office. I mean,
Well, and on that comment, I mean, sometimes contracts have bigger risk attached to them than is proportionate or commensurate with the contract price.
Right.
So that's not always a good measure
way
either.
to do it either. So I mean, but any type of development agreement.
Yes.
Anything like that, that is
Anything
the
that-
attorney's office.
Yes, usually the ones that are listed in here when Mary Ann went through here, the types that require council approval. Collective bargaining agreements, the city attorney's office has looked at. All real estate purchases, we look at the development agreements, leases, even parking leases, I mean easements, land use restrictions, intergovernmental contracts, well, development agreements. So yes, all the ones that require council approval, I do believe I see and review all of those. And to that end, we do have a task force the mayor's put together where we've been calling everyone together to try to identify what kinds of contracts come before the city in each department and who's been signing them. Are they purchase orders or invoices or purchase orders with terms and conditions in them? I mean, there's a broad category of things that people are signing, and it's okay that they do sign a lot of them. And so we're working now to try to clarify and carve those out, because you're right, my staff wouldn't have the time or the ability to review everything. So if we carve those out and can train staff appropriately as to what they can sign and not sign, I think that's a totally workable solution.
Okay, Alderman Kearney?
And I understand how your staff would never be able to keep up with it, but I think it's important for us to know who's signing for what. I just don't think that a contract could go in front of somebody for $100,000 and they sign it, and I just think that it would be good to know who is responsible for signing what types of contracts in order to even keep track of those.
I agree, and I think that is a training issue. As Chair Martins pointed out, it says that department directors can sign contracts of $10,000 or less.
Right.
So we just have to train people that unless you're a department director, you're not signing them. It's either a department director or the mayor and the clerk under the procurement policy.
Right. And do we have that situation, maybe?
I think we could do more training. We do have a contract training video out on the intranet from the attorney's office, but we need to make that more, I mean, we've called it to people's attention, but maybe we need to make a better effort to make people watch it
Right.
or require that they watch
Yeah,
it.
my biggest concern is that we have the proper parties signing the contracts as they should be and not filtered other places.
And that's a good concern to have. So as you got it before you tonight with those changes, I think the rest of that paragraph goes on to explain what it, I mean, if you want to leave it that the city attorney will approve contracts as to form, and just accept the changes the way they've been proposed, I'm okay with that, and we'll work with this committee to make sure that we delineate which contracts come to which department and which can be signed by the department director and which should come to the attorney's office for review. Does that sound good? And then we'll bring it back?
Yeah.
Or just, not for action, but just to make you aware of what we've put together?
I think that's a good idea.
All right. Any other questions? Or comments? All right, thank you.
So I'm guessing we're good with the motion as amended then, so. You're, well,
That's not what was said.
the,
In the paragraph, the amendment stated to re-add city finance director and city attorney.
correct.
That, what Ann just said is that we're going to leave, which is lower in the paragraph, the city attorney shall approve the contract as to form. So that would not be the amendment that's on the floor. The amendment on the floor adds the language that was struck.
Correct. Okay, so we'll need to vote on the amendment and then on the original policy? No, or,
Because the original, the motion was to include that striking,
That's the amendment, yeah.
that's, it, but that was a part of the original.
Do you really need an amendment? You started with an amendment to amend the document, but you should start with a motion to approve the proposed changes, and then you can make amendments from there. But in your original motion, you could just say, let's adopt the proposed changes
Right.
with the exception of, and then you don't even need an amendment. You're making it a little harder than I think you need to.
Right, but the original motion, I think the clerk, I think the additions of the two positions were included in the
Right.
original
in
motion.
the original
Right.
motion, correct.
Okay, so then you would need to amend that. If you've already taken a motion to adopt the proposal in a second,
But
and then
we
somebody
added-
moved to amend it to take out that language or
I guess
put it
I
back
could do
in?
that, yeah. Take it out again, okay. Well, okay.
So that's
The
your
motion, Cody, do you have it? The motion was
Yeah.
to
And that's,
approve with the amendment of adding the city finance and city attorney back, that, the language that was struck. So that is the motion on the floor, I believe.
The motion that I originally had was just to amend it as you stated, but not amend to approve, just amend.
Well, we didn't have a
Yeah,
motion
that's
to
what I
approve.
thought. We don't need to amend the document. We need an original
Original
motion
motion.
on the
Original
floor
motion,
to
then we would
approve
need an
whatever
amendment.
changes
Yeah.
we want.
Came forward.
Okay, but
Or
now
you could
there's,
just say, let's move to approve this document with the exception of the strikeout on the last page.
yeah.
And that's your
well,
motion, your
but we-
original
that would
we
be
do
the
have-
original
They will
motion.
have to withdraw their motion and their second to present.
Yeah, they're going to have, yeah.
That would,
I
yes.
think it would be more weird to present an amendment to
To take
add
something.
that,
Take it out again.
take it out again. I think if that's okay, I think it would be best if.
If you withdraw.
If you would withdraw the motion, but that's up to the
First and second.
person who's making it as well as the second.
We're amending motions, not amending documents. You can include those amendments in your original motion, right?
But but the original motion did, well,
Yeah, but they can withdraw, or we can
Withdraw
vote
the
on it.
motion, Start over again,
Yeah, it's up to them.
but it's
Okay.
up to the,
I guess it's Alder Killian, it's up to you if you want to withdraw your original motion, or if you want the motion with the amendment like you originally proposed.
I'll withdraw the original motion, but I would like something that's going to clarify, something official that's going to clarify that we will receive information that will be put into the policy about who's going to review what. So I would like that clarified, if that's possible.
So,
you have to,
I would,
I'm so
I would
confused.
also remove the second on that motion. But as we had discussed earlier, I think we need to put something in place as to who is responsible for signing as, just because, as we had stated earlier,
yep,
the signing of these contracts have at times maybe been people who maybe did not have the authority to do so.
So I think the policy's clear, I just think people aren't clear. We're trained about what their authority is or isn't, because it already says that contracts will be signed by the mayor, countersigned by the clerk. The city finance director will also countersign them. Certifying funds have been provided by the council. City attorney shall also, if it implies, countersign them as to the form. And the city clerk shall attest to the mayor's signature. And nobody other than a department director or those four people that are mentioned should be signing them because of that last sentence in there about the $10,000. So by process of elimination, if people knew to go to read the procurement policy, they'd know whether they have the authority to sign something. They'd need to recognize it as a contract that's got not just a purchase order, but provisions in it that attach liability to the city and that they shouldn't be signing it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
So we have the language there. We just have to make sure that people know what that language is. And that's
Yes.
where your
Yes.
training comes in process. Okay.
So now that you've withdrawn your original motion and your second, I think I would recommend that you move to accept the proposed changes.
so I'll move to, motion to approve the procurement policy as presented with the noted changes. I'll make that motion.
okay, a motion from Gisselman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from McElhaney. Okay, and then the noted, and then I guess if there was an amendment, we could take an amendment at this point, but otherwise, I don't think we need to, because it's, the motion
It's just as is.
is just yours is a motion as is.
Yes.
And with the understanding that staff needs to understand the procurement policy so that they know who is a signatory for a contract. So,
I'll put that in the minutes as
Okay.
staff direction.
okay. Anything else? Does that satisfy everyone? So, all right, Alder Killian?
They will come, as our city attorney said, they will come back to us with some sort of information that there was additional training, so everyone knows.
Be happy to do that when
Yeah.
our group gets together again and we come up with a list of contracts, and then we'll send it out to all city employees, and we'll provide that whatever information we send out to all the council, so you know what we've instructed staff.
Right.
Okay. Anything else? All right, I think we got it.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that carries. All right. That's a good deal. Discussion, number 5, discussion and possible action on ARPA funding.
Yep. So we had talked about adding this to the agenda really to get ideas from the committee. We're approaching that December 31st, 24 obligation date. At your last meeting on July 9th, you had made 2 recommendations regarding moving the housing money to the Community Development Authority, and then the solar, both of those will go on to council, even though the solar didn't pass, right?
No, well,
We never did it,
it passed, but it was a mixed.
3-2.
Oh, 3-2,
Yeah, it was-
okay,
it was-
I was
it was a-
thinking
it was a- it was a-
failed.
yeah,
So those
mixed
will
resolution.
go to the next council meeting. But there are some other issues, finance and council had authorized, because when we had initially created several positions within the budget, the outreach coordinator, Tracy's position, and we had 3 firefighter positions. Those, at the time that they were created, we thought we could only spend the money through December 31st of '24. The federal government expanded that, and we can now spend money for internal positions through the period of December 31, 2026. Finance and council approved allocating ARPA dollars for the outreach position. They did not approve the firefighter position. So those, the funding, the ARPA funding terminates at December 31st, 2024. As we approach the 2025 budget, those will have to be moved onto the levy if they are not funded with ARPA. So I'd like to kind of bring that back to that August meeting so that we know how we would like to fund those firefighter positions in the 2025 budget. The other thing that is in the current ARPA budget today that we're, I guess, struggling with is the day and night services. We got a really late start on those. And so there will be excess funds, but the contract ends on December 31st, 2024. So if you are interested in obligating those funds for that purpose, we would need to either find another supplier that we would want to enter into a contract, or a provider that we'd want to enter into a contract with, or extend that contract. And then I think the third one that we're having some issues is with the skate park. We opened up bids today, and they were way over budget. And we're struggling with some of our procurement in getting vendors to bid on that. So we'd like to bring those 3 items maybe to the August meeting so we can work on those. Right, Jamie, or would you want to talk about some of that today? I don't know if we can with the general item that we have, but that's really our goal. And then, we've got some outstanding applications, so we would bring those back to that meeting for you to look at those again. And then at that point, we could come up with a strategy of what we want to do for the rest of the year so that we can ensure that we have the funds, all of the funds obligated before the end of the
Before the
year.
end of the year, yes, exactly. Okay. Discussion on that? Okay, not seeing anything, so we'll see those items at the August meeting.
Yes.
So, all right, good deal. Okay, next item is the 2023 financial results presentation. I know you've been waiting bated breath on this one.
Yes,
We've been
and-
promising it for weeks.
I know. And the audit is nearly done. I've been consumed by wrapping up final audit, things, crossing i's, dotting t's. So by law, we have to have it, the auditors have to have their report issued by December 31st. So we are right up to the deadline this year, but we will make it. I'm certain of that. So that's good. Even though this is my report, I don't expect that there would be significant changes between this report and what the auditor does. Typically, we invite the auditor in to give a presentation. He doesn't go into as much detail as I do on our financial results, but that will happen probably in October, because they are getting, so our audit really is two components to it. One is financial, so to say that our financial statements are fairly presented. And that, they usually also give a statement on our internal controls. The second big component is what's called the single audit, because we receive federal and state dollars. The federal and state government have delegated that oversight to the auditors. So they have specific procedures that they have to do. Again, testing the internal controls to make sure that they are intact so that we spend our federal and state dollars appropriately, and then to accumulate and develop an inventory of those dollars that then gets reported to the state government and federal government. They have clearinghouses that we basically submit that report to. And so it's compliance and financial over that single audit too. So the financial audit is due to the state of Wisconsin by July 31st. And like I said, if we don't have it turned in by that date, we receive a penalty of transportation aid. So it's really important for us to get it done. The compliance audit is due by September 30th. So they have not concluded all of their work. They've done the financial part of the single audit, but not all of the compliance work, where they're going into files and testing. Okay, did they, is the file complete on the information, for example, on ARPA, those kinds of things. So they'll finish that in the month of August. So anyhow, it's like not.
Yeah, I see that. So I'm gonna try to get it up on the TV for
Okay.
the committee members, and I'll have it up on there too, because I
Okay.
don't know what's going on with the
Okay.
projector. And I'm just about to get it.
Somebody, maybe,
Jiggled it? Move it?
Yeah.
we need a tall person to, we can't move the screen.
Yeah.
Move the projector?
Yeah.
All right.
Think you can reach that? Eric left.
that's gonna turn?
I don't know.
I don't
Seems
think
like
it's the-
it.
I don't think it's the projector. I-
You don't?
The aperture is, it's, there's something
Oh,
wrong
yeah.
with the,
Oh,
Yeah.
It's not that.
okay.
Right here, I have it up on the screen there, and then for everyone else that's
Okay.
behind me. I'll try to,
Do you want me to come over there, or should we?
It's up to you.
We can figure it
Yeah.
out this way. Okay. So it's a long PowerPoint, and so we can quit at any time. It's really,
About now?
I heard that. We can do that. if you want.
Mary Ann, this is Mary Ann's show, so.
So we can go into further detail. For example, one of the things that I'd like us to really spend some time on is the motor pool fund. And we've spent some time on that today regarding the acquisition of this vehicle. We had hired a company called Mercury. They had come in and done a large study, because what is happening, just for overview, is, we charge the departments for the use of the vehicles through hourly or per mile charge. That was not generating sufficient money for us to purchase the new vehicles, because those charges then go to the motor pool fund as a revenue source, and then that fund pays for all of the expenses related to maintaining the vehicles and purchasing, and then we're not generating enough money to purchase new vehicles. So they had made several recommendations, and one of the things that we asked them to look at was, for example, leasing vehicles, and whether we should continue to lease vehicles or whether we should be purchasing them, because the leasing does, when you look at the monthly charge over, for example, a 5-year period of time, it seems like it's more than what you would incur if you did an outright purchase. The one caveat is that that agreement is paying for the maintenance, and the other thing the consultant said, they reviewed our lease agreement with Enterprise, made a few small recommendations for changes, which were incorporated into the agreements. But they said, currently, because we've fallen so far behind on our replacements, their recommendation was to continue to use that lease method until we had our, kind of the ship righted, and then we would go back and look at that and see if we wanted to migrate away from that. But currently, because we're so shorthanded on mechanics, and because we were not replacing vehicles on a timely basis, and they, covered the fact that, when you do operate a vehicle for longer than that sweet spot, you're incurring more maintenance costs, your fuel consumption usually is higher as a vehicle ages, and so their recommendation was to go with that lease. But I'd like us to circle back and look at that, because we do have a new finance committee, so we've lost some of that institutional knowledge from that time. And, I guess we increased what we were going to charge the departments in the 23 budget and again in the 24 budget. And the 23 and 24 budget both envisioned that we would borrow money to fund some of the replacement of the vehicles. But the other issue that we're experiencing is large delays in actually getting vehicles. For a while, we couldn't get vehicles, and now there's been, delays in receiving the vehicles. So we didn't borrow the money because we didn't, when we borrow funds, we have spend down requirements. And then when we didn't know when those deliveries were going to come, we elected to delay borrowing, which has been, I think, a wise thing because we didn't need the funds at that point. So that would be an example of areas where I'd like to delve further in that we're not going to do tonight. So this is just kind of an overview. So all government entities use fund accounting. Fund accounting allows us to accumulate revenues, expenses by specific activities. So we use fund accounting, but the general fund is where most of our operations are that our citizens rely on. So examples of that would be all of our administrative tasks, police and fire, refuse collection, most of our transportation activity, and parks and recreation. And so the big funding mechanism for those in the general fund is either our state aids or levy. So when we look at the budget, ooh, and this is kind of small, our budget for revenues was in '23 was $40,061,000, and our expenses were $40,361,000. So we had more expenses than revenues by $300,000. And I think this was the second year that we budgeted with that strategy, because we were finding that through vacancies that we were generating profits at the end of the year, and that we wanted to try to reduce those profits. So we said, rather than reducing that personnel budget in a specific department for that vacancy, we would just not generate levy dollars equal to our expenses, because it's hard to predict where you're going to actually have vacancies. Because one year it can be in one department, and I guess it's the type of vacancy too. So in some situations, when it's a retirement, there's usually a sick leave payout. We do not budget for that sick leave payout, but it's an expense of that department. But typically, a vacancy will cover that expense. But if that retirement takes place, let's say at the end of the year, they have that sick leave payout, but there's no vacancy to recover that cost. So rather than trying to predict where our vacancies are, we say we're not going to do that within the budget. We're just going to reduce our revenues by what we think we would save through those vacancies, and that's estimated to be $300,000. Kind of looking at then our modified budget, you can see we increased that deficit spending by up to $676,000, and that was through amendments where we said, okay, we're going to use fund balance, and I have an outline of those on a future slide. We actually ended up with a profit of 1.5 million at the end of the year. So rather than losing money as was budgeted, we have a profit of $1.5 million. Most of that profit, or half of that profit, is generated from market adjustment. So by government accounting standards, and really all accounting standards require that we look at our investments and say, what are they worth today? And because we could buy an investment, let's say when interest rates were 2%, and now now you can get 4%, in that situation, your investment is less valuable, right? Because it's not paying the interest rate that's available today. But if we bought it at, let's say, 4.5%, and now it's earning 4%, then you have a gain. So in '22, we had a large loss, again, because that's when we saw interest rates really spike. Now that's leveled off, so that unrealized, and these are unrealized, we always hold our investments until maturity. So if we buy a bond and it's gonna, or a treasury, and it says it's gonna pay us 2%, it pays us 2% every quarter, and when that matures, we get our principal back, full principal back, and so we've earned 2% over that time. But because we have to adjust to market, it affects our income statement because we have to show that unrealized gain or loss on the investment. So in '22, we had a huge loss because of that unrealized market adjustment, and now it's stabilized, and now we've recovered basically half of that, 732,000. So part of that is a recovery from last year, and our, I guess, profit before that market adjustment was the 857,000. So revenues over expenses were 857, and then we added in that market adjustment, which brought it up to 1.5 million. In the next slide then kind of shows you the impact of the treasury yields over that period and why we're experiencing these market adjustments, because we have had a significant spike since 2017. You know, typically we're purchasing investments. We've had a strategy of laddering our investments. So we buy an investment and we say, this one is going to mature in 2024. Then we buy another treasury and we say, this one's going to mature in 2025, to try to offset huge swings in the investment market, and so that we always have things mature, so that if we have unexpected expenses, we have money to pay for it. So this is really kind of shows you how that treasury yield has been changing, and so as our investments mature, we're getting to purchase investments with a higher interest rate. And this next slide kind of just tries to explain this complicated thing. So we can go to the next slide. So I talked about the changes to the budget. So we started with a adopted budget of $40,361,000 of expenses. We made a transfer from fund balance for $110,000 for grant writing assistance. With the bill money that was coming up, we needed a lot of technical assistance because all of those were construction type projects. So we hired people like Clark Dietz to help us submit those grants. That's what that $110,000 was for. We did a $15,000 seal coat transfer, and then the City Hall security project of $251,000. So that brought our budget up to $40,737.
40 million.
Or 40 million, sorry. Thank you for that.
Too many commas.
Yeah. So really looking at, well, where did what caused our profit in 2023? And you can see that we had the biggest positive variance in our revenues, namely, again, miscellaneous revenues, which is where our investment income is, and in our intergovernmental charges for services. One of the things that we struggled with in '23, when we're comparing budget to actual, is our '23 budget was created and adopted using our old financial software, and then we had to map it into Workday so that we could do comparables. So our consultant did that mapping for us, and there, I think we found that there were some mapping issues that kind of created some complexity. The other thing, when we look, for example, at intergovernmental grants, you can see we had a negative variance of 397,000. Historically, a lot of our grants were recorded in the general fund. With Workday, it has a very powerful grant management component to it, and its recommendation, its best practice is to not manage those types of grants where it's more of a reimbursement style grant in the general fund, but to isolate it into a separate fund. So we had budgeted, let's say, for some of these grants in the general fund, but the activity ultimately took place in the grant fund for 2024, again, on the best practice of how to use Workday and the grant management accounting system. So it wasn't like we didn't get grants we were expecting, it's just that they were accounted for outside the general fund. So future years will have a much cleaner budget to actual comparison than we have this year, again, for two reasons. One, the mapping of the budget into the software was not perfect, and two, the budget was adopted using our old accounting software and how we accounted for grants in the new one.
So now we're 100% on
Yes,
Workday.
24.
So moving
Yeah.
forward,
Yes.
next year, when we look at this, we should see.
Yes, and I was
Cleaner
telling
numbers.
people,
Yeah.
the timeliness of Workday was great because we are getting, a lot of grants with a lot of complexity, and that software is really helping us track that, our grant spending much better than we used to be able to. And then the transfers in, just to point out, that's where you would see, that's where the pilot payment comes in. That's where the transfer from the sewer utility comes in, and transfers from other funds such as transit and the TID districts, where we're allocating administrative costs to those districts and to the transit fund through what's called the federal de minimis rule, which allows us to capture more grant dollars. So that's where all of those come in the transfers. Public charges for services, I think probably the biggest winner there is our EMS runs. Runs went up, and I think our reimbursement rate went up a bit. So you can see that's a positive there, too.
We changed those rates last year.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. And it kind of shows you a comparison of 22's actual to 23's actual. So in '24, our intergovernmental grants will see a bump because that's when we got the new shared revenue bump that the state government gave us additional shared revenue dollars starting with 2024. It came with it a few strings attached, which are called maintenance of effort. So we received more shared revenue dollars, but we have to certify each spring that we are keeping our commitment to police and fire staffing and levels consistent with prior years. And so if we drop our staffing levels, then we will get penalized and have reduced shared revenue as a result. So this is looking at the expenses. So you can see that we actually exceeded expenses slightly. So really, our gain was on the revenue side. General government, the budget was 5.4 million. We spent 5.2 million. Public safety, 21 million. We spent 21.6 million. Public works, 10 million 6. We spent 10 million 7. And parks, 3.3, and we spent 3.2. In both the public safety and the public works area, as I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, we had increased our billing rates in '23 for the motor pool to try to recover and right the ship so that we were able to purchase the vehicles and the rolling stock that we need with the revenues generated. And I guess our revenue budgets for those areas within public safety and public works, they're the ones that are paying the rolling stock or the motor pool charges, right? Because they've got all of the squads, they have the fleet of EMS vehicles and fire vehicles, and all of the street maintenance vehicles, the snow plows, all of those things. So I think that is the biggest component to the overage. If we look at expenses by department, you can see that there's, just some isolated overages. CCITC, the main change that I could see when I was comparing '22 to '23 was this was the first year of paying our subscription for Workday. And I was not able to circle back with IT to see if it was just a matter of that we didn't have the right subscription rate in the budget or what caused that, but that was really the big change that I saw when I was comparing current year to prior year. Human resources, when we prepared the budget, we had a vacant HR director. The new director didn't start until December of 2022, so the budget was already adopted. Obviously, you can have changes on whether somebody has a family plan versus a single plan, where they start in the pay scale versus the previous person. So that was the area, it was all in personnel that we were over. The mayor's budget, that actually had 2 cost centers that were put to the mayor's hierarchy. For cost centers, and the one that caused the overage was emergency government. We have a contract with the county for $10,000 to pay them for emergency government services, but there were also charges for all of the siren maintenance and things that historically would have been charged to the public works budget, and they ended up getting charged to this emergency government cost center. So that's really what caused the overage. It wasn't mayor spending, it was maintenance of sirens and things like that. Again, kind of growing pains on a new financial software. Yeah. And the fire, about 250 of that was in personnel costs, and about 250 of that was related to the motor pool. So the motor pool I already explained, and the personnel costs. So, when we were preparing the '23 budget, we knew we had these 12 new positions. We looked at the amount of overtime that was going to be required for the department. Working with the old fire chief, we thought, okay, we're not going to need to budget as much overtime because we've got all of these positions, but filling those positions was a way bigger challenge than we thought it was going to be. So we had, and compounded with that, we had more vacancies due to family medical leave, things like that. So the new positions were budgeted outside of the general fund, in the grant fund. because those were brand-new grants. ARPA was a new grant, SAFER was a brand-new grant. It wasn't budgeted in the general fund. And so the new positions, and even if they were budgeted in the general fund, we wouldn't have gotten grant money because the positions, we were slow to fill the positions, but we had more overtime because they were not there to pick up the slack when we had vacancies, and we had more vacancies due to turnover and FMLA. I don't know, Jeremy, if I've done a good job of explaining that or not.
I think so. I think we've done a good job at recruiting and trying to get there, but what we haven't, what we weren't expecting was, like you said, FMLA, but resignations. We've already had 5 resignations this year, and we have 3 more retiring at the end of the year. And with that many, I think I have 6 vacancies at the moment, and we're only getting 1-2 applications at a time. So working with HR and doing different things to do better recruitment and retention right now. But yeah, I think you did a good job explaining it all, but that all compounds together and causes excessive overtime right now.
All right, any other questions? Okay, let's move on.
So when we look at our we're a government entity, so we're really not supposed to generate a profit, but you can't estimate your revenues and expenses perfectly each year. When we look at our history, you can see that, from the period of 2009 through 2015, we had a net gain of $427,000. When we look at the, positives and negatives, since that time, we've had a net gain of $6.1 million, even though, last year we had that big loss. So we have strengthened our financial position over that period of time, which is a good thing. Moody's, who really rates the city, really looks at our fund balance as something that should be strong because it carries us through periods of, unexpected issues. For example, this, loss that we had last year, and that is one of their rating components. And the better rating we have, the lower interest rates we pay. So there is a positive correlation to having a strong fund balance.
Yeah, and you said that loss of last year, that was due to the market adjustment for our investments.
Yes.
So would you characterize that the gains that we see, for the last 7-8 years, that's mostly because of investment income and not necessarily because of like the levy?
I think it was, and this was one of the reasons why we just started to allocate that $300,000. I think it is because, we were seeing some savings with vacancies, because during that time period of 2016 up through 2021, interest rates were really low. So it really wasn't investment income. It was either savings in the budget. Obviously the winter can really impact our budget. So we had series maybe of mild winters. I can go back and really look at what happened each one of those years. But that was really what generated us to say, hey, let's not budget for 100% of our payroll costs. Let's use that $300,000.
Mostly personnel savings
Yes.
due to vacancies or a mild winter. So I think that's Alder Tierney. Wait up, microphone.
So we have that net gain of a little over $6 million. What happens to that $6 million?
So, and that really, if we look at the next slide, so that 6 million, or that 6 million, which is now, like we have a fund balance of $16 million, is broken up, and we're required to classify that. So 12 million of it is considered unassigned. That means that truly is basically your rainy day reserve. And we're,
Cash reserves we've got.
Cash reserves, yep.
Our general liquidity.
Yep. And then we have a component of it that's committed. those are, we've set aside about just under 200,000 for a contingency. We basically funded a commercial rehab program by 500,000. At the time, the council said, we're going to basically allow, community development to use these $500,000 of funds, but we are going to not give them to them forever. So we're going to reserve our fund balance and expect that back someday with no real deadline. So that is that 500,000. And then we have carryover funding, which, remember, we did the budget amendment of 251, 380, I think it was, for City Hall security. We had to carry that over for the 2024 budget because we didn't actually start working on the project until 24. And then you also approved 50,000 for radios for the police department to come out of fund balance from last year. So that's equates to that 301, 380. So when we add those up, that is about $800,000. Oh, more than that. About almost shy of $1 million for committed funds. And then when a tax increment district, and that's really, maybe we should go to that next slide. We can always pop back to this slide. But the next slide, when a tax increment district, the theory with tax increment districts is you invest in the beginning, public infrastructure, and then as development occurs, it helps you pay for that infrastructure. So most of our tax increment districts struggle with long-term deficits. And we have to fund those somehow. So we fund them out of the general fund. And we're basically taking some of our reserves and saying tax increment districts can use those funds while they're in that deficit position. So that totals $2.5 million at the end of '23. So of that 16 million, 2.5 is set aside to offset those TID deficits and just under $1 million. Oh, and inventory, because it's not considered, again, some of this is accounting jargon, but we also have to include the inventory because that's not considered current spend. And one of those big inventory items, you can see that inventory at the end of last year was 442,000. The biggest component of that is our salt budget, or our salt pile. So we had a large salt pile at the end of 2023 because of that last quarter of a mild winter as well. So, we have to set that aside and say it's not available for current spending. So then the rest of it, like I said, is available as a rainy day fund to use for investments and to help us weather periods of downturn in the economy. When we look at our grant income, you can see just kind of a historical chart. So these are some of our major grants. We call these more shared revenue entitlement aids. So it's not based on necessarily how much we spend. It's not a reimbursement, like we don't turn in a grant report to them and say we spent this much and then they give us that much back. We're allocated money, and all of these show up in the general fund. So our shared revenues, expenditure restraint. So the expenditure restraint grant is based on our general fund budget not growing any faster than cost of living and a little bit of like new growth in the city overall. And that is about $1 million. So it's really important for us to fall within that expenditure restraint grant, because if we don't meet that spending guideline, we lose the whole grant. It's not like you lose a little bit, there's not a penalty, you lose the whole thing. So it's really important for us to meet that expenditure restraint guideline each year. We get fire insurance dues of about $160,000. Our transportation aids are some just under 5 million personal property aid and computer aid. Historically, businesses paid taxes on the personal property that they use to conduct their business, their office furniture, their, not all machinery, but some machinery, and their computers. So initially, when the state decided they weren't going to allow us to charge personal property tax on computers, they replaced that with aids. But it's not an aid that grows like it used to be. As businesses were investing in computers, our personal property went up because that computer was worth more money, and so they paid more taxes. Now computer aid is flat, basically. Now they have started to exempt personal property, and they exempted it in full now, effective beginning of 2024, January 1 of 2024. So they've replaced that with aid. And then municipal services, we receive money from the state because we have a couple of state buildings, the UW campus and the Armory are the two. And so we receive some, I guess it's like a payment in lieu of tax because those state buildings are in the city proper. And again, next year we'll see an increase in some of these because of that increase in shared revenue, but it has that maintenance of effort tied to it. This kind of gives you a multiple year look at our property taxes and where we're relying on property taxes and the changes that we're experiencing in those. So you can see in the general fund from 22 to 23, we had to levy an additional $1 million. That leveled off in between the 23 and the 24 budget because the big component was the shared revenue, additional shared revenue contribution. Others that are relying on property taxes are community development, the recycling fund. That is a special revenue fund because we do receive grant money for that recycling effort every year. Debt service, capital improvements. Again, when we look at capital improvements, you can see oftentimes when we do experience cost increase and there is no interest in generating levy to go with those cost increases, we contribute less to capital improvements. And we either then do fewer capital improvements or we borrow more money. So, when we show right now, of all of our capital improvements, the only thing we're paying cash for is $505,000. So, I don't think that that is a good indicator of us being able to get out of issuing debt in the future because we're relying more and more on debt to invest and replace our capital. Central purchasing, this fund replaces ongoing maintenance, small maintenance things like hoses for the fire department. All of our computers are replaced in the central purchasing fund. The airport fund relies on levy dollars as well as parking and transit. And you can see that we did receive an infusion of CARES money during COVID that has been, declining so that we can't apply it to operations anymore. In 2020, our 2024 budget, we had to, with the state grant that we just received, the award for our 2024 state grant, the local share is 1.5 million rather than the 9.7 that we levied for. We typically don't spend our entire budget, so I think we'll be fine there, but I expect that we'll see another increase in needing to increase the levy for transit in the 2025 budget significantly. And then animal control, that we've been able to retain level levy, but now we've lost our contracts. That occurred after the budget was adopted, so we'll probably see that go up in 2025 as well. Again, kind of slicing the budget differently. Before we looked at budgets of individual departments. Now we're looking at the actual payroll for salaries and benefits. Again, some of this is, I think, some of the mapping errors that we talked about before. You can see, for example, unemployment other. That was some of our retirement codes were charged to this other category when really it should have been up in retirement or health insurance, because the other component in that was the HSA contributions. And you can see that we had, for example, the positive variance in health insurance. So I think the majority of this other component was mapping issues. But again, salaries and wages, we do have a budget variance of $500,000. Some of that was overtime in the fire department. I think the police department also had some overages in salaries and wages. They were able to offset that in other line items, though. Really just, some of this is just for informational purposes, kind of looking at our contractual services. Again, I think we had some mapping issues in the budget. Motor pool historically has been fall under contractual services, and during the budget process, some of it in some departments went to supplies and expense, in some departments it went to contractual services. And, you know, given the workload in this implementation, we really didn't have time to go in and fix all of those issues. But really, it kind of, you know, the reason I wanted to include this is you can see some of the cost categories, you know, like for utility services. For our departments and our operations for general fund activity alone, our utility services about $1.1 million. So, you know, all of our buildings, the gas, the electric, anything that's charged to utility services, that's the actual expense, the 1.1 million. Technology services in the general fund, 1.5 million. Refuse for curbside services, and for our buildings, just over $1 million. Professional services, $1 million. So those are the big categories. Yeah.
Where is it a combination of things that, because the budget was for a little over 6 million, but we ended up at 7.7 million?
Right. Like I said, I think when the mapping occurred, some of the motor pool was charged to supplies and expenses for some cost centers, and some of it was in contractual services. But when we paid the bills, actually did the allocation to motor pool, it all showed up in contractual services, because that's where it's showed up historically. I think that's where a big portion of that is. And as I pointed out, 24, we created the budget and we're experiencing the expenses.
We shouldn't
the
see these
same.
errors
Yes,
moving
correct.
forward, so
Yep.
this is.
General fund supplies and expenses. Here you could, and this kind of shows you, here the budget was 5 million, the expenses were only 3.9 million, and actually the prior year even less. Again, I think it's really a matter of settling in with Workday.
But it looks like we're starting to get a more accurate picture
Yes.
too, moving forward.
Yep.
So part of the growing pains is switching our financial package.
And then also materials would be salt, well, and we've got some of these categories. Salt would fall under raw materials, the asphalt, purchasing any of the bituminous project things, sand, all of those things fall under the raw materials. So that's a big component, but less than we've experienced in prior years for salt. And then fixed charges are really where you have your lease payments and insurance. I might have duplicates. Oh. Yeah, little error in the slide. So I didn't update the fixed charges line, but really, we do have some small others, 45,000 in capital outlay and transfers out, and these transfers were to the grant fund accounts, again, because of the, I guess, the new using grant funds for these reimbursement style grants. So in addition to the general fund, we have a lot of special revenue funds, again, because we're tracking grants or we're tracking funds that came to us, like revolving loan funds where we had grant money once upon a time. We are issuing new loans and getting paid back on those loans, and so we're required to track those. So you can see we have a number of special revenue funds, and really just kind of tracking the fund balance. Again, fund balance tells us whether we have funds available to continue this activity or not continue the activity. ARPA, we're recognizing the revenue as we get it in. The fund balance that's here would be the investment income that we had not spent yet. If we look at the next line, environmental cleanup fund, you know, we've talked about this. This was money that Wausau Insurance paid us years ago to assist with cleanup at the Holtz-Krause site. We have used it for that Holtz-Krause site when we received the okay by the state of Wisconsin. That really relieved us of a lot of that liability when it was turned into soccer fields. They released us from just using it for Holtz-Krause, and so we've been using it for cleanup in other areas such as Riverside Park. But you can see as a result, we're having a decline in that reserve that we have available for future environmental cleanup. And our insurance payments, they were required to pay us insurance payments each year, and that ended.
So
I think it was last
that
year.
fund will not replenish.
It's not a replenishing fund, correct. A lot of these are related to community development and either their grants or their revolving loan funds. Room tax is governed by the Room Tax Commission as well as our internal budget for room tax. The recycling fund is funded by either grant or levy dollars.
I think public access, that's the franchise fees.
Yes.
From the cable
Yep.
company. So,
Yep. And then the next slide covers debt service. Really just wanted to show you that, you know, we're retiring just over $10 million a year of principal. Interest was 1.6, and this is just on our general obligation debt, not on the water and sewer revenue bonds. So we had total expenses of $11,689,000. We offset that with $4,198,000 of a general property tax levy. We received premiums of $200,000 on that debt issuance that we had, and transfers in. So this is the tax increment districts paying their share of the debt. So our fund balance in that fund is $584,000, so a negative change of just under $16,000. And the next two slides really just are to show you the changes in debt and what is due within 1 year. So in '23, we increased, and this is our general government activity, so we increased debt by $12,420,000. We retired debt of $10,040,000, so a net increase of $2.3 million, and we have $10,470,000 that we're paying off in 2024. We actually, that was due within that 1 year, $10,470,000. so a little higher than last year. And then the business activity is really our water and sewer debt. So we retired $1.3 million of revenue bonds. We borrowed $17.5 million for the GAC filtration. We refinanced that a couple of weeks ago, and that new debt is only $12,420,000. So that was a positive. And then we also drew a little bit more out of the sewer clean water and safe drinking water because of those projects not being completed, but we also made debt payments. So our total debt payments were 5.6 for the water and sewer utility and what was due in that 1 year.
I think the rest is on, any questions? Do we want to move on with the
What's that?
TIDs, or?
So, oh.
Or do we
is
miss a
this-
slide?
Is this slide hidden? No, you're going the wrong way. The other way. Oh, maybe it's, I don't know what that, it might be hidden in, could it have been hidden accidentally in the slide prediction? It doesn't matter. It was really, yeah, there it is. Okay. Thanks. Really to show you our capital budget, this is for operations, that central purchasing fund, just under 800,000, and then capital improvements of just under 5 million. So most of that 5 million is, we're borrowing for, but we do have special assessment income that helps defray those costs, as well as we do have that $500,000 of levy dollars.
Now into TIDs?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. This is just a map of the TIDs. We're required to give an annual report to the Joint Review Board each year. That has to be accomplished by July 1. And we already conducted that meeting about a month ago. So really just kind of showing you the growth in our TID districts. The purpose of the TIDs is to generate new growth for the city and for the schools, the county, and technical college. We will be getting ready to close TID 6 and TID 7. Those are the ones that will be closing first, but just a chart to show you the growth.
TID 6 will be closing this year.
Right,
We elected to take an extra year on the TID to use that for affordable housing.
yes,
And I'm going to imagine TID 7 will be in 2026.
yes,
And we may be able to do that again for that TID, I think.
yes. We'll be bringing that to a future
Yeah.
agenda. So when we look at TID 3, this is in the downtown. It has a positive fund balance of $552,000. We have some projects, the River Edge in 2024. These really are the 2024 projects. Just because I wanted to kind of update you on that. The River Edge Trail extension, the McClellan ramp demo, parking lot 14 reconstruction. We did Short Street, and then remediation of the water plant in Wausau Chemical were in the 2024 as projects that we're going to undertake. Kind of giving you an idea of the increment generated in '23, it was with 3.1 million, '24 it was 3.6. And it has $13 million of outstanding debt and a mandated retirement date of 2031. TID 6 is on the west side of the river, but in the downtown area. It has a fund balance of $1,010,000. The increment went up 23, it was 3.7, 24, now it will be just over 4 million. TID 6 is on the west side of the river, but it also goes up to 17th Avenue. So the new apartment complexes are really what's generating that increase in increment. It has outstanding debt of $5 million. And this is the district that we carried over the 1-year extension.
Yep.
TID 7 was out sort of by Menards area, but Menards was not included in the district, but it's in that area, sort of where Surgical Associates building is and the Quick Trip is out there. So it is paid all of its debt, so it has no outstanding debt, and it is donating increment to TID 12 each year. And the Joint Review Board did, and the council did a project amendment to allow for increment sharing through 2025. So now, council would have the option to add additional years to that donation. They would be able to add additional years and then allocate to low-income housing or close the district. So that's what we'll be bringing forth for consideration.
Next year.
Yes.
Yeah.
And increment, you can see 23 was 1.7, 24, 2.1 million. But it's expenditure period, so you have to conclude your expenditure period 5 years before a district's mandated retirement date. So we can't spend money in TID 6 or TID 7. There are some allowable things, debt, you can retire debt during that 5-year period. And for example, in TID 6, we are in a lawsuit over one parcel that was purchased. It was that apartment building that was on the corner right by the river and Thomas Street. Remember that red brick building? Yeah. So we're in a lawsuit, so some of the legal costs we're still allocating and we're allowed to allocate to. TID 8, also on the west side of the river. This district is got a couple of projects. It has a small deficit of $66,000. It's doing 8th Avenue Street improvements and the Washington Street sewer siphon project and retaining wall. Its increment is 776 in 23 and in 24, $1.1 million. I misspoke before about TID 6. This is where the apartment buildings are. My apologies. So, yeah. So this is where the apartment buildings are in TID 8, and that's why the increment here went up dramatically. It has debt of 5.6 million with retirement in 2033. We do have several developer obligations, 583,000 in 2024 and 200,000 that we'll have to pay out in 2025, and that's the extent of those obligations. TID 9 is Big Bull Falls. You can see we've been just generating regular deficits in this district. The fund deficit right now is just under 300,000. We have retired all of our debt, which was really, we had borrowed money to then give money to the brewery for infrastructure projects. But we now have retired that debt, so this deficit is not going to go up any higher. We still receive increment property taxes, and then there was also a loan component. You can see that the loan balance outstanding is just under 260,000. We did not receive any loan payments in 2023, but when I look at this district with increment, because the building will exist going forward, and so there will be a taxable component to it. If we're able to generate that increment going forward, we would be able to retire the district before termination, and it would fund that deficit. So, it's not a significant amount, and we will recover those costs. But it is going to show deficits with a slow recovery for the next many years.
But that district potentially, once we get on the positive side of it, we could retire that early.
Yes, if someone, the other thing is historically the state has valued this parcel because it's manufacturing.
Yeah.
And the state isn't as aggressive in some of how they value manufacturing, so that creates a small increment. TID 10, business campus. This district has a fund deficit of $800,000. Increment was 439 in '23, 723 in 2024. A small debt balance with the big project that was going on was Stewart Avenue, 48th to 72nd. TID 11 was the big business campus expansion that we did for Great Lakes Cheese. This district actually has been performing very well. We had a few years of deficits, but we have been generating a fund balance each year. Its fund balance was $700,000 at the end of the year. We do have obligations to Great Lakes Cheese. We pay them basically 50% of their tax bill back each year for several years yet. I've got it outlined in a future slide. I can't exactly remember how much. And we do have one project coming up, and that is trail improvements. I believe that's in 2025. Increment 1.6 in 2023, 1.8 in 2024, and its outstanding debt balance is just under 11 million. TID 12 is for the mall, and this is where you can see that we really have the big deficit of 2.2 million. As I indicated earlier, TID 7 has been sharing increment. We had 3 years of sharing, so you're allowed to share 5 years. We, in our project plan, only shared 3 years. So as I mentioned earlier, we would be able to share an additional 2 years of increment. And the purpose of that increment sharing, or I suppose the justification for it, is there were a lot of costs to tear down the mall and kind of bring it to ground zero again, put in the infrastructure, but there was no increment to fund that. And so that increment from TID 7 went in to help defray those costs. The current projects obviously are, all of the road work that we have to do to put in the new street grid. We do have several developer commitments. WAS, we entered into a developer agreement with WAS for them to demo the mall. They have about 311,000 left they did at year end, 311,000 left to draw on that. Mac and Don development agreement is with Mark McDonald. He receives a payment each year to offset improvements that he made to the clubhouse. He purchased that clubhouse and made improvements to it. And then the biggest one in this district is the T-Wall agreement of 10.8 million, which we've not made any payments on that. And that, again, is basically property tax abatement. The increment was 377 in 2023 and 454 in 2024. TID 7 has contributed 1.9 million to date, and it has debt outstanding of 7.7. So this really is the district that I think, as a finance committee, we have to focus on and monitor to ensure that those deficits.
They don't balloon. Yeah.
Yes.
When does this one close?
This one, I don't have an actual closure date on here because it's so far out.
It's so far, it's okay.
I think
so
I
it's-
have
we're not-
another slide. 2044 is the mandated closure.
20 years,
Yeah.
19 years, okay. Yeah, because once, T-Wall's got, I think it was 10 years. Once they're complete, it's 10 years of tax incentives.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah.
So just a summary of all of the districts and their outstanding debt, and that is included, when we looked at the slide of debt for government purposes, this debt is included in that debt, but I just wanted you to know, where the debt is by district. Another slide summarizing all of our TID obligations, because we do have TID obligation for the church green space to turn that into a park, which really, we don't have any finances. And then I
That's
didn't
the
know-
lot adjacent to where the McClellan ramp used to be.
Yes, across the street, yep. And then the Great Lakes Cheese, our obligation is 3.6 million. I didn't have that off the top of my head. And then just a summary of the mandated closure dates and expected closure dates. And then, as we mentioned, TID 6 and TID 7 are the TIDs that will close in the near future and what that will mean to the school, the county, and the technical college. Because, once the increment is no longer needed for the district, it frees up that value to be used for general government purposes. It's really just for informational purposes. These slides were, like I said, provided to the Joint Review Board as well, so it's, certainly of interest to them. So, do we want to keep going? Do we want to?
What do you got, like three?
You got 4 more.
You got,
There's really,
you got 4 slides left.
Okay, so I just don't want people to be, and really, these are really high level, and I'm not sure, like how valuable the slide is itself. But like I said, the motor pool, if we look, it's depreciation. So when we're charging the departments that revenue for using that equipment, then we're supposed to use it to replace the equipment as it ages. So our new equipment purchases in '23 were 1.9 million. Our depreciation was 1.4 million, and we made a small profit of $400,000. So we can take that profit in depreciation, because depreciation is not an actual cash expense that goes out the doors. And that just under 2 million needed to fund the new equipment purchases. But we should be purchasing close to $4 million because we have this backlog.
Gonna say
And we
that.
had, at the end of last year, 3.1 million of outstanding purchase orders. So these were orders in place that would need to be funded when the bills come in. And just to kind of show you how slow it is, it's that mid-July, and of those 3.1 million purchase orders, only 1.2 million has been delivered so far. So we've really, that slowing of those purchases is why we didn't have to borrow the money to replace equipment. And is why we really need to increase those fees to the departments so that we don't have to borrow money anymore for our equipment. We wanted to be able to purchase those when we replace them. But, what I'd like to do is actually get the tape when Mercury came and send it to the departments, or send it to the committee, and either watch it at a meeting or, give a homework assignment for people to watch it, and then kind of have us cover any questions that you have, or, take what we learned at that and where we are today to kind of see what we have yet to do for motor pool. Because, that when we look at how we're providing police, fire, and street services, the two big components are our employees and the equipment that they use. So we have to invest in that.
Because 1.9 million isn't a lot of money for the motor pool. I mean, we could wipe that out with
Right.
just a single fire engine ladder
Right.
truck, so.
Or a huge peak in fuel prices,
Yeah.
and we have experienced large increases in replacement of the assets too.
Yeah. I see a question here?
Yes.
Yeah.
My question, Marianne, is that we use enterprise for purchasing vehicles and the maintenance,
Right.
correct? Have we ever looked at another
So we.
vendor to see
yeah.
if we could get a better deal, if they could deliver faster?
So it was a competitive RFP with Enterprise, and they did win that. I can't remember if we had a lot of competition. Solomon, do you remember if we had a lot of competition on that RFP? And not all vehicles are purchased, so we have that lease, but we're also purchasing vehicles outside that agreement.
Right, I don't.
And big trucks
I don't
and
remember
stuff.
specifically if there was multiple, other entities that went in against that, but I do know that that was one of the contracts Mercury did review.
Yes.
And they said that the contract was fair.
Yeah, and they do services for, we did a competitive procurement on that consulting services. And they, have companies all over the United States, both government and for-profit companies that they're providing consulting services on their fleet.
The stuff I think we lease is like the light vehicles, the
Right.
cars, the trucks, not the stuff like the heavy equipment
Right.
or
And generally
or
things
the
without
police-
light bars or, right.
Or the police cars and that,
Yeah.
because because the squad cars take a considerable amount of upgrading to, once you put all the equipment in them.
And then the two other, so internal service fund really is, we're providing services to ourselves. Did you have another question, Vicki? Okay.
No, I was just going to say that I wasn't looking at, I was just talking
Yeah.
about fleet,
Yeah.
not fire
Oh, got
trucks
it.
or anything like
Okay.
that.
Sure. So these are, like, we have a central place to tabulate all the costs, and then we're billing departments. That's why it's called the internal service fund. So the insurance fund is really our CIVMIC, so we belong to Cities and Villages Mutual Insurance Company. We're a member, and they provide us with all of our liability coverage, boiler insurance, professional liability insurance, pollution insurance, all of those things are coming through CIVMIC. So they're buying for communities all over the state of Wisconsin. It's just a Wisconsin cooperative, I guess I'll call it.
A mutual insurance company.
Yeah. And so this, and included in the insurance fund is workers' comp. So we're self-insured for workers' comp, so we do have some exposures there. And it's important for us to maintain a fund balance for unexpected claims. And then we do have deductibles, like a $50,000 deductible on some of our general liability policies. So it's important for us to have a healthy fund balance there. In our employee benefit fund, really there was a point in time not too many years ago that we were self-insured for health and dental. We did move away from being self-insured for health. We still are self-insured for dental. So this reserve really is there from back when we were self-insured for health. And we do have a consultant that reviews that every year. We were experiencing some pretty significant claims, and so their recommendation was to go to full coverage. But we've reserved this reserve for the time when maybe we can go back for self-insured. And then water and sewer are our big enterprise funds. And, we'll really be covering their financial condition at the special meeting that we're having with Ellers.
Next month.
Yep.
yeah.
And then Metro Ride, parking, and the airport fund are our others. Just kind of summarize profit and loss for the year. So Metro Ride, there are years where we levy more than they need, and they have had the ability to build up some reserves to kind of offset those years. And you can see, I had talked earlier about the fact that we had CARES funds available, and so we were able to drop our levy as a result. So when you look at that first column for Metro Ride, you can see that in 2020, our tax levy was 1.1 million, and then in 21 it dropped. In 22 it dropped because we had those CARES funds, really predicting that we were going to start depleting those CARES funds, so we started building that levy back up. But now those CARES funds will no longer be available. A parking fund is another area where I'd really like us to focus our attention, because we, through COVID and the demolition of downtown, it's really had an impact on our parking fund and our ability to pay our costs for lights and maintenance of the ramps. And then airport fund is for the municipal airport. And some of these, even though it's showing a loss, that's why I have the depreciation. Some of that loss is related to depreciation, which really isn't a cash outlay, but it is an expense of the operations. Because all of our enterprise funds are basically accounted for like businesses. So they have depreciation expense, unlike our governmental funds that don't show depreciation.
I think at one time we were talking about hiring a consultant to look at our parking
Yes.
needs too, and that might be something to come
Yeah, that we can look at.
look at again.
Yep.
If,
We survived.
yeah, so, all right. It wasn't the, yeah, it definitely wasn't the death of 1,000 cuts, but.
It was. I have to give Marianne a hard time. Anyway, Marianne, the one slide, the fiduciary and
Oh, yeah.
agency funds, now those are just things that you do accounting for?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
That's not, I
They're
just want to
funds-
make sure that people don't think that is what we outlay to these
Oh, yeah,
agents.
thank you. Yeah, I might have skipped through that. So these are funds that we have on hand that we're performing accounting services for. So the Entrepreneurial Center out in the Business Campus, Wausau events, and then the Cemetery Trust Fund, where we have a trust fund that is helping maintain the, yeah, perpetual care,
of
thank
the
you.
cemetery,
Gary.
yeah, the.
Yeah, for the Grand Avenue
Yeah.
Cemetery. It's on
Okay,
Grand Avenue.
any questions on this? We went through a lot of stuff here. And I think it's important to kind of, as we do our work in this committee, to kind of understand what all entails the, on a financial aspect, the expenses and the incomes and the funds and and things like that, that all pertain to the city here. So it's good to see this recap at the end of the year, how we ended up, and maybe that will help us focus our attention on, where there can be savings in the future, or maybe where we need to look at and where there are costs that we need to look at and maybe do a deeper dive or an analysis. So thank you so much, Mary Ann, for taking us through this. I really appreciate it. So any other questions? Yes?
And I don't mean to dig too deep, but that 515,000 for a way, you don't have to go back to that slide, but that, can we look at that? Because how is that going to be affected into the 2020? I'm curious about how that's going to be affected into
What,
the
515,000?
25 budget, because
Salaries and wages.
Oh, yeah.
salary and wage, I'm sorry, right, thank you. Salary and wages, that 515,
Okay, yep.
because that seems a lot, and I get overtime, and I get, but it, as we go into the 2025 budget, is the new plus 19.5, that's the actual, so how do we,
Right.
any comments?
Yeah, I do think, so when we I looked at the '24 budget, when I was putting this together and looking at our financial results, and I did look at the '24 budget, and I do think we did some corrective action on that overtime budget in the '24 budget. So we should not have that same experience in '24.
But it was mostly overtime at the point that we.
Right.
We would know that.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Yep.
One of the things, Mary Ann, is, and you had talked about the parking, and in a meeting earlier this year, we had talked about what we have in the Jefferson Street ramp, and, it was kind of an incentive for
Right.
people. And it was a lot, it was like 300 spots that we have.
Oh,
And I
right.
talked about, why do we have so many? Why are we not reducing that?
Right.
But
So, we had talked about putting that back on the agenda for this meeting, and Eric and Ann Jacobson and I met, and we're not going to bring that back. So I think it had been put on the agenda as more of a housekeeping item without actually the request coming from the other party. And so since they haven't requested the renewal, we're not going to offer the renewal.
So we're letting that contract expire at the end of the
Yes.
month.
Yes,
So,
a good question.
no. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I guess a motion from Gisselman, second by Tierney, and non-debatable, so we are adjourned.
Yay.
Yep.
Or do you want to have a vote?
Huh?
You want to have a vote?
Oh,
Debatable.
actually, you don't need to, but,
I'll